welcome to the second panel. We will be dealing with pathways to jihad, mapping out the radical mosques in Europe. Already the panel doesn't quite match the title because we've stretched far beyond Europe. We have a colleague who's come in from Cairo, a colleague who's come in from Nairobi, my colleague Olivia here, who does work on Europe. My role, I think, is just to get the panelists to set out their basic arguments quite briefly, and after about 15-20 minutes, I will switch to you for questions. So do think of fiendish things to ask them. Olivia, I slightly have the impression that you're managing this panel because you've already told me that you want to make an introductory statement, so I'll hand over to you in a second. But perhaps just to start off, and I will come to you first, just to ask you the basic question, can you set out your stall for us a little bit? In your research and your practical experience, what is the role of mosques in radicalization, and can you situate yourselves a little bit within the field of research and practice? What are the sacred cows that you find yourself having to slay in panel sessions like this? What are the particular arguments that you find yourself making? Just so that the audience can get a sense of where you stand on these things. Olivier, frankly, you're in charge. Go.
Good morning. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you for GLOBSEC for organizing this panel and the great report. Before answering Roderick's question, I just want to reflect on the 18th anniversary of 9/11, because the reason I'm here today is because of 9/11. At 8:20 on 9/11, I was in the World Trade Center, and I walked across the street at my office on the World Financial Center. I still have goosebumps 18 years after that my life changed that day. I was a hedge fund manager at Oppenheimer. Our office was above the Wall Street Journal offices, and all our windows blew away when the planes hit. And if you know New York, you see that the World Financial Center is quite far. I mean, there's a highway between the World Trade Center and the World Financial Center. And that day I decided that I will spend the rest of my life going after the people that did that, and that's why I'm here, and that's why I gave up my job and my good salary as a hedge fund manager to plunge into analysis of terror groups. Having said that, in terms of Radical Mosque, Casper mentioned the Hamburger Mosque, we can mention the Finsbury Mosque. It is an issue that I've talked to politicians for the past 18 years of how important it is to win the war of ideas. It's not about going and killing jihadists on the front, but it's killing the brainwashers and killing the masters of terror that put and brainwash some of our citizens. Unfortunately, what we've seen time and again is politicians refusing to listen to not only people like me, but also people from the security services. So I feel I work closely with the security services, and I know their dedication to getting to the bottom of it, and especially in Belgium, some of the groups have done tremendous work on radical mosques and the link to terror. But before coming here, I looked at some of the cases. I found about 80 cases in Europe of imams linked to jihad and terror attacks. So we can go back to Switzerland, for instance, and the appearance of the Muslim Brotherhood in the 1960s with Said Ramadan coming, and Switzerland, that you don't think when you talk about jihad, has had a recent history of radicalization that should be mentioned. What is extremely interesting in the case of Switzerland is that most of the people that were involved in jihad were converts that were radicalized at a mosque in Geneva called the Petit Saconnet, where Said Ramadan and his clique of Muslim Brotherhood have been working on. But also what's interesting is how much things are changing in terms of the radical mosques. So there are two aspects when we look about who's controlling them. So you have obviously historical states that have been funding radical mosques: Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Turkey, Kuwait. And the second thing is very large and rich organization, the first one being the Muslim Brotherhood. Interestingly, what we've seen in the case of Geneva is that the mosque was controlled by Saudi for the past 25 years, and at one point, 4 of the staff, including 2 of the imams preaching there, were on France terror watch list. They were fiché S. Things started to change when, Mohammed bin Salman came to power and decided that funding Wahhabism around the world would stop. And we've seen that those people have been fired from the Geneva Mosque. We've seen, we'll talk about what's going on in the Brussels Mosque as well. But there's a big move from Saudi getting out of financing those mosques. And I think it's important to recognize this. I was the first one to criticize Saudi when they were funding and pushing for Wahhabism in Europe. Now things are slowly changing. I'll stop here and then I'll pick up on other things later on.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Is it morning or afternoon? Still in Nairobi time. And thank you to GLOBSEC for inviting me to come and share a few points with yourself with regard to this subject matter of pathways to jihadism, radicalization into violent extremism. I speak more from an African perspective. The mosques that are there in Africa that we've seen to be kind of, petri dish where terrorists, a lot of experiments are done or they grow out of that. And I do know for a fact that there are quite a number of mosques and connections to or places in Algeria, in Morocco, in Tunisia, with connection to the terrorist activities or events that have taken place here in Europe. Further afield in East Africa, mosques like the Masjid Musa in the coast of Mombasa, which was renamed to be Masjid Shuhada, or the mosque of the jihadis, by the late Abu Drogo. You'd find that some of those non-terrorists actually passing through that particular mosque in Mombasa, and very clear connection with Finsbury Mosque in London. The person that went into Somalia was on his way to Somalia. I can't remember his name, but he came to UK and committed a terrorist attack. He ran. Or rather, he drove his car, ran over bystanders and stabbed an army officer somewhere in the UK. And you'll see a connection between this person went into that particular mosque. Now, I need to add here, however, that the mosque is not the problem. And this is very important. There are thousands of mosques, say, in Kenya. But out of that, you'll find less than 10 mosques being problematic. So it's the people that are running those mosques. And sometimes, and for this particular case, Masjid Musa in Mombasa, you'll find that the committee that was actually running the mosque, because they did not agree with the ideas of terrorism and violence by mainly the young people, what they do first is to chase away or to take over the mosque so that they can have a space, a physical space that then symbolizes their activities in terms of recruitment, legitimizing their actions, and basically encouraging young people to move across from Kenya into Somalia and back into Kenya and into other places in Africa or into Europe to carry out attacks. Now, the most important thing here is ideology. And many of these are young people who seem to have been dispossessed, confused, marginalized, excluded from the mainstream society. That still plays a role. So when they fall into the hands of a renegade imam or a religious cleric, what happens is that particular cleric or imam would explain their problems as emanating from far. and a lot of it, the challenges that these young people have, whether it's growing up in very poor neighborhoods in poverty situation, these recruiters and imams that I have observed in the research that we've done and the work that we've done, particularly in quite a number of mosques in Kenya, they latch on about any grievance to their local situation. They localize the more global grievances. For example, the recent Dusit to attack in Nairobi that happened in early this year, you'd find that the terrorist group Al-Shabaab, actually, which is linked to Al-Qaeda, one of the reasons they gave was the movement of the US Embassy from Jerusalem, or rather from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. Now, they would localize the more global or the conflicts that are far removed from Kenya and latch on that to more localized problems of exclusion, dispossession, the so-called war on Islam or global war on terror, depending on who is talking about that. And you start seeing that these young people start understanding Islam from that perspective. And so it's that misuse of religion in those spaces that then we see many young people falling a prey to that. And there are many challenges, of course, ideologically speaking, coming from some of the countries in the Middle East that provide resources, grooming, and encouraging this kind of mosques to sprout all over Africa. I know we talk a lot about Wahhabi, Salafi jihadism as being part of a major problem in some of those particular mosques. Now, to the way we've worked under a program called Building Resilience to Address Violent Extremism is that we have designed not just counter messages, but alternative narratives and a better way of understanding Islam to build resilience amongst the young people so that they cannot easily be recruited by this false promise of Khilafah or the caliphate that is promised to many of these young people. When we do that, we find that to actually work. And most of these mosques, some of them were closed. Now you'll find that those who still insist that they must continue on that line of path of radicalization into extremism, moving on to the social media and other spaces other than the mosque to carry on their activities. I'll come back to more examples in your next round of questioning.
Thank you for the invitation. I'm very pleased to be here to attend the session. And allowed me to speak in Arabic. My English is not so very fluent to follow the session. فيما يخص مشكلة المساجد كما قال زميلي الدكتور مصطفى، نحن نتحدث عن المساجد ليس كونها بناء، ولكن نتحدث عن الخطاب الديني السائد في المساجد، أو بمعنى أدق المسجد كونه مكان يعكس الخطاب الديني السائد في منطقة معينة أو الخطاب الديني الذي يمارسه الإمام والفئة التي تقوم على المسجد.
Thank you for inviting me. So in reality, we're talking here about the role of mosques, just as was described by my colleague Mustafa, not as an infrastructure or a building, but as the religious discourse that is being used and spread in that mosque by the imam of that mosque, or the overwhelming religious narrative that could be used from that mosque and be spread afterwards.
ولذلك يمكننا أن نقول أن المسجد أو الإمام الذي يعمل في المسجد أو الخطاب الديني السائد في المسجد هو الذي يقوم ببناء ما أسميه البنية التحتية للوعي الديني في المجتمع.
So therefore, I would admit that it is the mosque, not as a building, as I just said, the imam of the mosque and the religious discourse or narrative that is being spread from that mosque that will build the cultural and religious consciousness infrastructure that will be spread thereby from that mosque.
ولذلك لدينا في المجتمع العربي مثلا في الحالة المصرية مثلا هناك مؤسسات رسمية حكومية تقوم على هذا الخطاب الديني. مثلا وزارات الأوقاف المنتشرة في الدول العربية. وزارة الأوقاف هي نموذج حي للتداخل بين المؤسسة الدينية والحياة العامة، أو المؤسسة الدينية والمؤسسة الحكومية. هي وزارة ضمن الوزارات الحكومية، وهي قائمة على مراقبة الخطاب الديني، تأهيل الأئمة، وهذه الوزارة يرأسها دائما أستاذ تعلم ودرس وتخرج في مؤسسة دينية رسمية.
And if we want to go back to the Arab state situation, I will take here the example of my country, Egypt. In Egypt, we have official governmental institutions that will control or lead religious activities. We have what we call in Arabic the Waqf ministries. It's the ministries of Islamic affairs, which is a very good example how interdependent governmental portfolios that are not religious interact with the religion and religious matters. That is the Ministry of Religious Affairs that will control the religious narrative, will train the imams, and it is usually led by a specialized religious individual.
هذا الشخص يكون أستاذ في الجامعة، جامعة الأزهر مثلا، أو المؤسسة الرسمية الدينية الذي يقود الوزارة. وبالتالي الوزارة تقوم هنا بدور محوري يتمثل في بعدين. البعد الأول هو تأهيل الأئمة، تدريب الأئمة المتخرجين في الأصل من المؤسسات الدينية. ومن ناحية أخرى بتقوم بدور رقابي حكومي مفاده ماذا يقول الإمام في المسجد، وهو نفس الدور الرقابي المطالب أو المطالبة به المؤسسات هنا في الغرب، لأنها تقوم أيضا بدور رقابي يبحث في ماذا يقوله الإمام. إذن هناك دور تأهيلي تدريبي للإمام ودور رقابي، لأن بعض الأئمة يؤمنون ببعض المصطلحات، ببعض المفاهيم المتطرفة، حتى لو كان هذه الأئمة متخرجين من مؤسسات دينية رسمية.
So as I said, the Minister of Religious Affairs, Islamic Affairs, is usually a professor from the official religious institution, Al-Azhar, for Egypt, for instance. And the minister plays a pivotal role in these matters. It has mainly two roles. The first one is to train the imam that will be leading prayers and leading mosques all over the country. Usually those imams are graduates from official religious institutions. And the second role is to exert a governmental control over the content of the religious discourse that's being spread and used by those imams. As it is the case here in Europe, where the religious discourse is being controlled by official institutions. We have also to acknowledge that some of the imams, in spite of the fact that they graduate from official institutions, some of them might also carry an extremist discourse.
المشكلة قد تبدو أنها ليست معقدة لدينا، لكن بالفعل لدينا مشكلة معقدة في ما يخص الرقابة على المساجد أو الخطاب الديني السائد في المساجد، لأننا نتعامل مع مشكلة فكرية، نتعامل مع مشكلة ثقافة دينية، مشكلة اطلاع وتأهيل للإمام. وبالتالي السؤال هو ماذا يقول هذا الإمام في المسجد؟ السؤال الثاني، هل هناك ثقة بين هذا الإمام وبين مستمعيه؟ سأضرب مثال مسجد الروضة الذي حدث فيه عملية إرهابية قتلت فيه الجماعات الإرهابية حوالي 300 مصلي يوم الجمعة في سيناء. المتطرفون أو الإرهابيون المنضمون لبعض الجماعات الإرهابية قتلوا هؤلاء في المسجد لأنهم متصوفون، لأنهم لا يؤمنون بالفكر المتطرف. وبالتالي عملية الخطاب الديني المنتشر في المسجد يلعب هنا دور. هناك مساجد متصوفة أو مساجد يسود فيها الخطاب الديني الصوفي، وهو خطاب ديني معتدل يتم أيضا عليه هجمات إرهابية حتى في البلاد المسلمة، مثلا هذه الحالة في مسجد الروضة في مصر.
So the situation seems not very complicated in Egypt, but it is the very contrary. It is indeed very complicated in terms of control of the content of the religious discourse that's being used and spread in and from the mosques. And this religious discourse depends on the religious consciousness, the culture of the Imam. It also depends on the level of knowledge of the Imam. What is being said by that Imam? Is there what is the level of trust between the Imam and the people that attend the mosque? And here I would like to give you the example of a mosque in the Sinai region, the Mosque Al-Rawda, which was the subject of a terrorist attack. 300 people were killed in the aftermath of that attack, just because it was a Sufi mosque, and Sufism, as you know, is the antithesis of extremism. So that proves that the nature of the religious discourse will determine whether we are going to be subjected to an attack or not.
هناك الكثير يمكن قوله حول المفاهيم الأساسية التي تناقش أو التي تمس عملية التطرف، سأتطرق إليها لاحقا، وأرجو أن يكون هناك متسع من الوقت للحديث عن هذه المفاهيم الأربعة المتطرفة التي نعرف منها مدى تطرف الخطاب ومتى اعتداله.
And please allow me at a later stage to explain what are the main concepts which could lead to extremism. I have 4 points, if you can give me some time for that.
I will do, thank you. I mean, I think we hear the same themes coming out in what our three panelists talk about. One is the relationship between the religious institution and the individual. All three of you, I think, mentioned that. The second is the ideological question and how you engage with that. One of you talked of war, the other talked of literacy, resilience, and the other more of a sort of regulatory approach almost. And thirdly, the relationship between the local and the global, how outside countries sponsor mosques or how outside conflicts or tensions are imported into a different local political situation, as in Kenya. My second question for you, and do be brief this time because otherwise these people are going to beat me up, is really just to ask you how, in particular, the Mohammed and Mustafa, how what you're looking at interacts with the European situation. So you both talked about what's happening in your part of the world. Where does Europe feature in that? Is it as a battleground? Is it as a partner in policy? Is it as an accidental recruiting sergeant? What is it? And then perhaps to come back to Olivier and see if this chimes with what you're looking at. But do please be quick.
Yeah, very briefly to your question, I think all of those, many of these young people, some that we've talked to, successfully de-radicalized, if there's such a word. I realize there's also a challenge of terminologies and concepts here in Europe as we have them in Africa. Many of these young people that get to become terrorists through the radicalization process into violent extremism, they see Europe first and foremost as a big player in the so-called global war on terrorism, which these radicals equate to a global war on Islam. And so they look at the European countries, the policies that are coming mostly from here in Europe to be targeting Muslims. They don't necessarily, they're not sophisticated enough to see that the war on terror is precisely to surgically remove or to address terrorism. And actually in many ways helping them because of the challenges that we face in Africa, Middle East. And so in their equation of the war on terror as war on Islam, they see Europe and many European countries is fair game in their attacks, unfortunately. The second point here is that they consider that in terms of the political upheavals that we are seeing, and this is fairly new. So the increasing levels of supremacism or far-right movements, engagements, activities in Europe or in the United States of America. In the recent, but this is still quite anecdotal, they say, oh, see what they are doing in the United States of America with all these white supremacists. See what they're doing in Europe. There is a surge in terms of far-right groups getting into elected offices or becoming much more powerful. Let's say their argument has been that if they can be that extreme, why not themselves? And so there's some kind of a paralysis here that we are seeing, and this is growing. The third element here, and this is my last point with regard to how they look at Europe. Some of the stories that you hear from many of these young people, again, in terms of the narratives that fits onto the larger, overarching meta-narrative is, if I may, is the political connections between Europe and some of the countries in the Middle East. The issue of I spoke earlier to that, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict features a lot, whether we like it or not, in the discourses that we see these young people discussing, or if they don't know much about that, the recruiters who are much more knowledgeable in Islam and to some extent politics, even though warped understanding of politics feature in some of these discussions. And so groups like Al-Shabaab, for example, you use a lot of references to the white, to Europe all the time with America. But now, some of those recruiters know exactly what they're talking about. They know that there might be so much of a reality in the stories or narratives that they are feeding these young people, but they deliberately change the story. War on terror as equal to war on Islam in order to get the young people to buy into their stories and ideas and narratives of violent extremism and to harden them ideologically.
فيما يخص الحالة في أوروبا، نحن نتحدث عن مشكلة لها 4 أبعاد من وجهة نظري. البعد الأول والأقوى حقيقة هو الخطاب الديني المتطرف الداعي للكراهية والسائد في بعض المساجد الأوروبية، في بلجيكا، في فرنسا، أيضا في ألمانيا، في بريطانيا. هذا هو البعد الأول.
As for the current situation in Europe, I could portray it under 4 different angles or 4 different dimensions. The first dimension, which is seemingly the strongest one, is the nature of the extreme religious narrative or discourse that is being used and spread in some of the European mosques, be it in Belgium, in Germany, in the Netherlands, or in the UK, a discourse that contains incitement for hatred.
البعد الثاني وهو أيضا بعد هام جدا، وهو عدم إلمام الأئمة العاملين في كثير من المساجد بالثقافة الغربية، بل أستطيع أن أقول بخصوصية الثقافة في بعض الدول التي تختلف في حضارتها عن دولة أخرى، وهنا أتحدث عن اللغة، عن التاريخ، عن البنية المجتمعية وهكذا، مما يعطي خصوصية لدولة معينة مقارنة بدولة أخرى. كثير من الأئمة إن لم يكن معظمهم غير ملمين بهذه الثقافة الأوروبية، وبالتالي لا ينطلقون منها.
And the second dimension, which is also very important, is the lack of knowledge by the imams of the Western cultures in plural. They come in Europe lacking this literacy, this knowledge. They don't know the very specificities of European societies. They don't know the language. They don't know the history of the countries they work in. They don't know the nature of the social fabric of those societies. And I would say that not a minority of them lack that knowledge. I would say that it is to the contrary. The majority of them lack that knowledge.
البعد الثالث وهو أيضا بعد هام يتمثل في عدم الخبرة الكافية لدى المؤسسات الأمنية، المؤسسات الرقابية الرسمية في الغرب بعملية متابعة ما يحدث في المساجد. وهذا يؤدي إلى اختلاف الحلول. هناك في ألمانيا مثلا برنامج اجتماعي إدماجي، هناك في فرنسا قوانين تم تشريعها للتعامل مع قضية التطرف في المساجد. هنا في بلجيكا مجرد إجراءات ينادي البرلمان أحيانا بسن قوانين جديدة. إذن هناك في وجهة نظري عدم خبرة كافية لدى هذه المؤسسات الرقابية والأمنية للتعامل مع مشكلة فكرية دينية داخل المساجد.
And the third dimension is let's say it, the total absence of expertise from the official institutions in those countries, security institutions or all the control institutions, those institutions who are deemed to be responsible of supervising what's undergoing inside mosques, which leads to different solutions. In Germany, for example, they have the solution of what is called social reintegration programs. In the UK, they have passed laws to counter extremism in mosques. In Belgium, it is still at the stage of just calling for such laws. So I think that there is also a lack of knowledge from the official institution how to control that speech.
البعد الأخير وهو أيضا بعد هام عملية تمويل المساجد، وهي قضية أخذت حيز كبير في النقاش في ألمانيا بين المؤسسات الحكومية الرسمية الكبرى ومؤسسة ديتيب مثلا الممولة من تركيا. هذه قضية التمويل هذه تعني أن الإمام الذي يعمل في المسجد يتبنى الخطاب الديني للدولة الممولة أو للمؤسسة الممولة، وقد رأينا مثال ونموذج واضح هنا في بروكسل في عام 2018 سأتحدث عنه.
And the fourth dimension is the financial aspect. Who is financing those mosques? In Germany, for example, there has been a very animated debate between official institutions and the Turkish Islamic institution called TTIP. And we know that the Imam is going to adopt the speech that is wanted by the institution that finances his mosque. So it depends on the speech that is wanted by that country. In 2018, there has been quite also a debate in Belgium for the same issue that I will tackle just now.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Maybe just to say, I will open the floor after Olivier has spoken, so please prepare your questions.
So there are three themes that could be helpful for the Q&A. The first one is the link between Radical Mosques and Jihad. I said there were examples, but I just want to make that extremely telling. So the Barcelona attack, for instance, was one of the only attack where the ringleader was a Moroccan Imam that officiated in the mosque in Ripoll. He was in Belgium for 3 months. He was linked to the 2004 Madrid Al-Qaeda attack. Interestingly, the father of two jihadists said that he thought his son was in good hands because he was attending mosques and that he could never think that he would become a jihadist. What is extremely important about that story is how ignoring the fact and pushing it under the rug is not changing things, because you see part of the main attacks that we had in Europe coming from Charlie Hebdo. The Kouachi brothers were first radicalized in a mosque in the 19th arrondissement of Paris. One of the Bataclan suicide bombers were radicalized in a mosque in Chartres. The Thalys terrorist from the train was radicalized in a Salafist mosque in Spain. I mean, in Salman Abedi, the Libyan behind the attack of the Manchester Arena, was also radicalized in a mosque in Manchester, where the Imam was calling for armed jihad. And then I can go on with Kosovo, for instance, where 22 mosques in 2015 were calling for armed jihad and going to Syria. The same goes in Prague, for instance, where the Palestinian Imam was arrested for trying to send people to Syria. So it's a large phenomenon, and that it's not only societal, but it's also the jihad. The second point, taking on some of my colleagues' point, is the role of some countries. Now we know after the Qatar papers published in France that the main Qatar charity is funding 140 mosques and Islamic centers in Europe, investing 71 million euro. But the second point is, supplanting all that is the role of Turkey. I mean, Erdogan has pushed for a control of the European Muslim community, and in places like France, for instance, where the Turks do not represent the majority, the head of the French Muslim Council is now a Turk that is extremely close to Erdogan. So Turkey should be looked at extremely closely when it comes to pushing the Muslim Brotherhood agenda in Europe. And the last point that will be not only a provocation for our politicians, but also the main aspect of those things. People inside the Maghreb, for instance, have been telling our politicians for the past 30 years about the issue of radicalization. The late King Hassan II of Morocco came to France 30 years ago and said, look, I feel extremely bad, but I sold off my soul to Saudi Arabia, and Wahhabism is penetrating my country, but I had no choice, I needed the money. Please do not do that. And time and again, I've spoken to politicians, and I'll give just one anecdote that follows on my colleague's point about the imams that are coming. I spoke to the then Minister of Interior, Jean-François Copé, of France about, 15 years ago, and I said, look, 91% of the imams preaching in mosques in France are illegals, and 50% of them do not speak French. Is that the way you want to build French Islam? And his answer was mind-boggling. He said, look, we cannot deport people that have been in our country and that have families. And I said, look, they're breaking the law. Why do you mean you cannot deport them? They are basically pushing and brainwashing a new generation of Muslims, and you'll have, in 15 years, terror attacks in France by people that have been brainwashed. And the last point that I want to put to you, not as a provocation, but as a way of thinking in the larger scheme of things, is, for now, our main counterterrorism strategy has been to go after the soldiers, if you will, not to go after the generals. And I always try to make an analogy with drugs. What we have decided is to go after the drug user, not after the dealer. And until we go after the dealer, the problem of radicalization is never going to go away. And unfortunately, I can tell you, spending too much time with politicians, they still don't get it. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, questions. We have a few more minutes. Is there anything? I was always told to count to 7 and then a question comes. There we are.
First of all, a question for Abdul Rahim. How should imams be better controlled, for example, here in Belgium? For example, should they follow a theologian course or study at university? Second, you have also the problem of Quranic interpretation. For example, the use of the fighting verses in the Quran. I want to also express Islam is a beautiful religion, but how do you think experts should tackle the problem of Quranic interpretation and also the application or applying the Quran on contemporary context? Thank you.
شكرا على السؤال. في الحقيقة هناك من وجهة نظري قصور في التواصل مع المؤسسات الدينية المعتدلة. هناك مؤسسات دينية معتدلة في الشرق وأيضا هنا في أوروبا يجب أن ترى أو تنظر إليها الحكومة البلجيكية نظرة تعاون أكثر عمقا. على سبيل المثال مثلا أنا لا أريد أن أروج للمؤسسة التي تخرجت منها، ولكن لدينا في الأزهر الشريف مثلا في مصر قسم الدراسات الإسلامية باللغات الأجنبية. وفي هذا القسم يدرس الطلاب الدراسات الإسلامية، التفسير، الحديث، الفقه باللغات الأجنبية. بعض خريجين هذا القسم ممن درسوا في الشعبة الفرنسية يقومون بتحضير أطروحات الدكتوراه هنا في بلجيكا وفي فرنسا. يمكن الاعتماد على هذا الجيل الذي يعلم جيدا خصوصية الثقافة البلجيكية مثلا أو خصوصية الثقافة الفرنسية، وبالتالي تتواصل بلجيكا أو المؤسسات البلجيكية مع مؤسسات معتدلة تفسر هذه النصوص التي تتحدث عنها تفسيرا معتدلا. مثلا هذه إمكانية لحل المشكلة.
Thank you for the question. I would start by saying that, again, there is a lack, a shortage of contact between the official institutions in Belgium and moderate religious institutions that exist here and there. And such institutions exist indeed. I will not make any propaganda for my institution, which is Al-Azhar in Egypt. But I would say that there is a special branch in our university which gives Islamic studies in foreign languages, and we have a special department for French, for example, where we train imams in French, so Islamic studies in French. Those people, they get to know the various specificities of the French-speaking countries. So, and through those classes, we instill also the spirit of moderation.
أنا تخرجت في قسم الدراسات الإسلامية باللغة الألمانية، وكتبت أطروحة الدكتوراه الخاصة بي في ألمانيا، وعملت لبعض الوقت في المساجد في ألمانيا، وكنت أخطب الجمعة هناك، وكنت أعلم ما معنى الخطاب المتطرف وما معنى الخطاب المعتدل.
I myself graduated from the German-speaking department in the Faculty of Islamic Studies at Azhar Sharif in Cairo. I did my PhD thesis in Germany. I worked in Germany as an imam. I gave Friday sermons, and I can say that I'm knowledgeable of the very specificity of the German society.
بخصوص الآيات القرآنية التي تدعو في ظاهرها إلى العنف، هناك آيات وجمل تدعو في ظاهرها إلى العنف في كل الكتب المقدسة، وتم استغلالها على مدار التاريخ، سواء كانت في المسيحية، اليهودية، ونحن نعاني الآن من الإسلام. المشكلة في استغلال هذه الآيات، لأن هناك خطاب متطرف موجود يتم استغلاله لأغراض معينة، وإذا تحدثنا عن هذه الأغراض نتحدث أيضا عن وسائل الإعلام التي تتاح للمتطرفين، وأيضا الأسلحة التي تتاح للمتطرفين، ومن هنا ينشأ الإرهاب، ولولا هذا الدعم ما وجدنا الإرهاب بشكله الحالي. شكرا.
As for the second part of your question regarding the interpretation of what is called combat verses in the Quran, they seem to be violent verses, but when you interpret them correctly, they're not violent verses. Such verses exist in other religious books, be it in the Christian faith or the Jewish faith, and through history we've seen many instances where those verses have been misused by people who wanted just to exploit them, to use them in order to justify violent actions. Not to mention the fact that those people, those extremists who use those verses for such purposes have also media outlets that support them and also have arms. And this is the main recipe to engender, to beget terrorism.
كلمة أخيرة، تحدثتم عن آية السيف، وهذه الكلمة السيف لم تذكر مرة واحدة في القرآن، ونحن نقول في الأزهر لا يوجد آية اسمها آية السيف في القرآن من الأساس.
And there is just a final word. Some talk about the verse of the sword in the Quran. I just like to recall that in the Quran the word sword doesn't appear from first letter to the last letter. So there is nothing such a verse of the sword in the Quran.
Is there anything further? Yes, please.
I'm Terry Schultz. I'm a journalist here in Brussels. Given what you know about the mindset and about the recidivism potential in prisons, as was spoken about in the morning session, do you think the European governments who are hemming and hawing about what to do with the detained fighters are making the right decision in trying to keep them there? That the threat of bringing them back is greater than whatever the backlash is going to be for letting their citizens face the death penalty or whatever other sentences are handed out in Iraqi courts, for example?
Is there anything else? Because I will close after this. Are there any other questions? No? Okay.
Let me attempt to, I'm not answering that question, but just drawing parallels here again, this whole question of recidivism rates. And it appears to be different from country to country, so I do not know whether it's just the way it's handled in prisons. So I haven't personally done any research on that. Last month I was in Oman and met with officials there, and there were 30 former Guantanamo Bay detainees that were handed over to Oman to de-radicalize them or to have them engage back in communities. And based on the officials that are handling those 30 Guantanamo Bay, former Guantanamo Bay detainees who are Yemeni, that all the 30 have really been re-engaged in the communities successfully. So they were talking of 100% success rate. Maybe it's cultural, because of cultural issues. This was the explanation given by the officials there. Perhaps it's the way they do it. And I do understand for sure that there are other places or other prisons where actually there is zero success rate in this regard. And I guess this is the work that researchers have to deal with and dig a little bit deep on why is it that these actions are successful in certain countries, certain contexts, and yet unsuccessful in others. Thank you.
Terry, regarding your question on the return fighters, I mean, obviously what we've been discussing in the past few weeks in Europe is mostly the return of women and children, because except the case of some people that are put on trial and in Iraq, especially French that have been sentenced to death, a lot of the jihadists, the male jihadists, have gone away. We find, close to 100 French jihadists fighting in Afghanistan today that went from Syria. So the main question is the ones that have been caught and that have been put on trial the way they've been put on trial in Iraq. But you have to remember that obviously, for instance, President Macron had decided at one point to bring in 2 planes full of close to 200 women and children. But because of the pressure of the public, he had to rescind on this just the day before they were supposed to fly in. So it's a very hot potato on the terms of political, but I would put to you that it's because of the justice system in Europe is not adapted to basically trying those people and sentencing them to the right level. If they were to come back to the US, yes, the sentencing would be 3 times, 4 times more harsh, but with the report that we've seen with GLOBSEC that 57% of the jihadists arrested in 2015 will be released by 2023, you must understand that the local population is not really happy to have all those people roaming free. So that's the dilemma that European governments are looking at.
2 minutes to sum up. Yes. Okay. Just to let you know, we're going to finish in 2 minutes. I'm handing these 2 minutes to Olivier because I know he's got 1 or 2 things that he wants to say. So, yeah.
No, a few more things. I mean, I'm going to take on what's happening and how the security services have done a great job, especially in Belgium. OCAM has done a tremendous job knowing what the threat is, what's happening in mosques, and government have been playing catch up. I think the main issue that we have to look at is the larger scheme of things when it comes to radicalization, and not only about jihad. I mean, you look at, there's one thing if anyone studying radicalization need to read when they get away from here is a report by a French education inspector called Aubin. It's a report that came out in 2004. It was a major study across the board in primary schools in France, from Paris to rural areas. You read that report, it sounds like science fiction, but you cry when you're done reading it. One item to show you how it's important to know where we're at and what's happening in some schools is, for instance, there was one instance where an 8-year-old shouted at its historian professors that he was telling lies about history. They said, look, it doesn't matter because the Muslims are going to kill the Christian and the Jews anyway. And so the professor asked, so when is that? And the kid candidly responded, oh, the Imam didn't say that on that tape. They have hundreds of reports like this. Interestingly, the French education minister put that under the rug, and it had to be leaked by one of my friends, that report, for it to come out. But that was in 2004. 15 years later, we're still at that level of incredulity from the government. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Right, I will draw a line there. Please thank all our three panelists and our interpreter who's been working very hard. Thank you all very much.